Welcome to Transformative Principal, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. We're going to simulcast this on Transformative Principal and the Cybertraps podcast because
Excellent.
I'm doing a Summer of AI series on Transformative Principal where we're talking about all of this stuff. And the other thing that I've created is this thing called AIleader.info, which is where people can go to learn about it as school leaders so they can get a better understanding of it. And I created what are called 3-minute masterclasses where people can learn little bits about artificial intelligence in just 3 minutes, because it's very complex, but it doesn't have to be that complex. And it's very unapproachable to understand how it really works. And one of my gifts is being able to condense things down and explain it in 3 minutes or less. So I've created that AIleader.info. Go check that out if you want. I think that's a really powerful place for people to get started. And the reason why we're talking about all of this stuff is because it's got everybody's attention, and we want to help educators especially make good choices around it.
Hey there, Jethro.
Hey, Fred. A long time no see. We are starting season 4 of Cybertraps.
Yeah. Fantastic. I noticed that we had crossed 100. This is our 155th episode, believe it or not. And
Crazy.
I am excited to rededicate ourselves to the climb to 200. So
that's right.
That feels good.
It's going to be here before we know it.
That sounds excellent. Well, it is good to chat with you. We have had a lot of things going on since we last chatted. I think one of our more recent conversations, I was actually in Ghana.
Yes.
And that wrapped up at the end of March. I came back and good old COVID arrived and slid through the apartment, and that kind of wiped out a chunk of time. But knock wood, at least we seem to have gotten past that. So.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And thankfully, knock on wood, I still have not gotten that disease, and hopefully it will stay that way for the rest of my life.
I am not encouraging you to try it.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of fun. And I will say, I mean, I because of my quote unquote advanced years, I was able to get a prescription for Paxlovid very quickly. I actually started taking it the first night I felt symptoms. And it was a little annoying because I felt fantastic for the 5 days that I was on it. Like, it was amazing.
Oh man, amazing.
And then you go off it, and like probably 20 or 25% of people, boom, it was like it was just lurking out there for me. So
you came back from Africa.
Yes.
You and I both have been doing a lot of stuff around artificial intelligence over the last few months. And
yes, we have.
I've been conferences for executive directors of principals associations. You presented at ASTI in Alaska, and lots of conversations and opportunities around that because everybody's being exposed to it now. Speaking bigly, why are we able to be focused on it now? And even though it's been around for such a long time, like.
Well, it's an interesting thing, Jethro, because certainly the concept of AI has been around for quite a long time. No question about that. And, to be honest, humans have explored the concept of artificial life for centuries. Probably the most famous example is Frankenstein. Is literally, it's alive. Think about, the great parody, Young Frankenstein. So, this is absolutely fascinating to human beings in general. I mean, we have one fairly well-known method for creating life, but then the question is, are there other forms of life that we can create? What people are jumping up and down about right now, which is known colloquially as AI, has actually only been around for 6 months. for all intents and purposes, when ChatGPT was released in November 2022. And I think people should understand that what is being referred to as AI in the press is not actually AI. It's what I would call predictive text. It basically consists of what are called large language models, which are able to produce intelligent sounding, quote unquote, material simply by taking vast quantities of text and breaking it down using incredibly sophisticated algorithms and making a, for lack of a better term, educated guess about what the next word should be in a given request. So, for instance, if I go on to ChatGPT and I ask it to write an email to you, Jethro, I can give it certain parameters and it will write something in the tone I request, but it will predict what it thinks the next word should be. And you can really tweak that with the prompts you write. As a matter of fact, there's a new career, a prompt engineer, which is just remarkable. But that's the basic concept, is that these things take vast quantities of data. They analyze it, and using that information, they try to predict what a rational sounding output would sound like.
Yeah, and
that's not intelligence.
It's not intelligence, but it almost is. And it is, to be honest, the thing that has been so amazing to me is how it can do a good enough job for so many things. And
sure.
I mean, I've got to say, for the vast majority of things that I typically write on a regular basis, what it creates is totally sufficient. And so I created a little tool called Write Better, Write, WRITEBETTR.com, writebetter.com. And what it does is it gives you an email address, and you send an email to this email address, and it will rewrite your email to be more professional. And that is it. Like, what I wanted to do is give people an opportunity to try something out that was as simple as sending an email, which people do already. And whenever I demo it or share it with people, I say, first thing you should do is try this out. Like, just take an email that you've already sent to someone that wasn't really a great email and just forward it to it and see what it creates for you. And the thing that's really remarkable about that is that I'm just using no code tools. And it's very simple for people to check it out and try it out and see what it's like. And that is part of what has made this surge in using these tools so valuable, is that it's so easy to get started, and it's not complex and it's not difficult. And ChatGPT made it so that it was really simple for somebody to start using something like this and feel like they could do something worthwhile. And I think that is really cool. So the idea of chat really started with Alan Turing, and because you are the resident historian on our podcast, tell us about Alan Turing and the Turing Test and where that came from, and why chat was the thing that makes sense, that is the thing that everybody is focused on right now.
Well, this is definitely one of those "how much time do you have" type introductions.
3 minutes.
Yeah, right. So I will not begin to do Alan Turing justice in 3 minutes, but let's just do the highlights real quickly. British mathematician and computer scientist, born in 1912, died in 1954. He is most famous for his work during World War II in Bletchley Park, which was where the code breakers of the Enigma machine were based. If you want to go see The Imitation Game with Keira Knightley and Benedict Cumberbatch, a little bit of historical license, but a really nicely done portrayal of that period. And I think Cumberbatch as Alan Turing was just brilliant casting. In any case, in 1950, he was a theoretical computer scientist. In 1950, he developed a proposed test for when we might be able to say that artificial intelligence has arrived. And his basic concept was that if you put somebody in a room and they're using a teletype to communicate with somebody or something, and on the other side of the wall, there is either a human being or a computer, if the person at the teletype cannot tell whether or not the other respondent is artificial or human, then you could argue that that device has now passed the Turing test, that we actually have achieved artificial intelligence. And it's a little bit facetious to call him the father of chat, because I don't think he had any idea, what this might end up being used for. But really, ChatGPT or Bing or Jasper or some of these other AI fueled services are pretty much answering the Turing test, right? If you sit down, there are lots of people who are using ChatGPT as a therapist. Quite honestly, you could easily persuade yourself that you're getting a human response from these chat engines, and it's really remarkable stuff. When you were talking, Jethro, I also have used ChatGPT for a number of quote unquote mundane tasks, and it's really, really helpful to get started. Where things start to get a little bit freaky, and this is something people should really play around with, is when you give it something that requires it to come up with unexpected responses. And my quick 2-second example of this is I was reading a Vanity Fair article about a woman who went and worked on the set of a Hallmark Christmas movie. And they churn these things out by the dozens every year. It's just a cottage industry, and people sit down and watch them. And I was wondering if I could get ChatGPT to put together a movie pitch for a Christmas Hollywood Hallmark type movie, but incorporating technology. So it came up actually with a secret organization called ELF that was going to be responsible for retrieving Santa's naughty and nice list. And yeah, you'd want to work it and tweak it a little bit, but you could run with it. And it came out of the blue. There's no precedent for that, right? So that to me says we're dealing with some stuff that's a little bit fuzzy, in terms of how we interact with it.
Well, yeah, and especially as it relates to education, lots of people are using it to create lesson plans and assessments and all kinds of things. And I think there is a lot of power in being able to come up with some off the wall things. And I really, the big surprise is that we thought that AI was going to take over all these low level jobs before, but now it
Right.
seems like it's taking over all these things that we thought computers could never do, and it turns out they're actually pretty darn good at it.
Well, it does say something about the legal profession that a
Yeah,
fairly large number of legal interns and low-level attorneys are losing their jobs, particularly in corporate paper mills where they're just churning out one contract after another. I got to say, if you've got a database of several 100,000 contracts, you don't need an attorney to come up with a new version of that.
right.
You can put parameters in, you can tell it what you want. And I think that's actually a really important point for people to be aware of.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's something where that relates to standardized education as well. And on the Transformative Principal podcast, we're talking with some people who are in that space and creating content and lesson plans and things like that. And the reality is, and people in education don't like it when I say this, but if we know that there's a specific way to teach something that every single kid is going to be able to learn if we teach it that way, then why are we wasting time and energy with a human being who's going to not teach it that way when we know that there's a right way to do it and that
Mhm.
can be replicated? And like, if that's the case, we really should be having a computer teach that if we know that there's a quote unquote right way to do it that leads to kid success. And so, for example, kids need to know how to read. And if we can teach them how to read in a fast and efficient way, then we can use the adults and paid teachers to do other things. One example of that I experienced many years ago was this program called Imagine Learning, which is
Mhm.
a program for kids who are learning English here in the United States who come from other countries. And one of my schools was a top 10% school using that, because I
Yeah.
just saw with my own experience, my own two eyes, that the students who did Imagine Learning did better at speaking English and reading and understanding English. And so I was like, look, let's make it part of our day that these kids are on this application using it on a regular basis, because it helps them. And what they need is exposure. And if we can get condensed exposure and help them learn what these vocabulary words are and understand sentences, like, it's going to make a huge difference. And sure enough, it did. And these kids did
Mhm.
great, and they improved on their abilities. But more importantly, they were able to communicate more effectively, because we basically said, you have to spend an hour doing this every single day. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
what else you got going on, that an hour every day. And we saw results very quickly from that. And I mean, so I had a teacher who basically made sure kids were on it. Wasn't a very good use of her time in the moment, but because kids were able to progress through it quickly, she could do other things with them because of what they were learning there.
I think that's going to be the big question right there, though, Jethro, isn't it? What are the other things, that teachers can do
Totally.
if they're incorporating this technology? And you've got the frontline experience, which is huge for this kind of discussion. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. If we look at ChatGPT as a tool, perhaps for teaching writing or helping with reading or theoretically with programming, right? One of the things that I think people are really going to be concerned about is if I'm a programmer, yet ChatGPT or its equivalent can spit out code in a nanosecond. What do I do? Where's my value added in that particular situation? And I think that's a question a lot of educators are going to be asking. I mean, this is kind of the meta cyber trap for educators, right? We're going to use this technology one way or the other. How do we incorporate it in ways that help preserve the expertise of teachers?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question that I don't think we have the answer to yet.
No, I don't think so either. Yeah.
I think that it's going to take some evolution, as with all technology. We're like, how do we start by, just replacing what we're already doing? And then we can, start to adapt it and do things differently that will be more meaningful and beneficial to what we're trying to do. But at the very least, if we can save hours by using this technology and
Hmm.
make it so that, if nothing else, the teacher just doesn't have to go home and plan lessons and spend as much time planning lessons. To me, that's a big win right there, that we can improve their
Sure.
quality of life by having that be an opportunity for them.
Well, let me give you a couple of examples real quickly because I've been researching this area for some of the stuff that I've been doing. And there's, as you know, with the cyber traps, obviously there's always good and there's bad. So there were a couple of teachers in England who did something similar to what you did in terms of incorporating AI. They did this, I think, probably 4 months ago, but they created a website that you could go onto, and you could type in a series of bullet points about each of your students, and their website would automatically generate a year-end review. And it was literally doing what you're talking about, saving teachers hours from kind of a
Amazing.
repetitive task. But clearly the teacher knew the relevant bullet points for each of their students. They just didn't have to compose the structure around those bullet points. And that I thought was really interesting. The flip side, and we're just starting to see the potential issues for educators, is number one, using ChatGPT in inappropriate circumstances. So, for instance, there was one administrator who, following a mass shooting, used ChatGPT to write a note to the school community, and it was just clearly artificial, and it lacked any real compassion or empathy, and people picked up on that. So that was stupid. And then the other thing that has popped up, and actually this has been in higher education as well, is the potential to use the existence of ChatGPT to harass students. And by that I mean, if a professor or a teacher has an issue with a student, ChatGPT can be an excuse to downgrade that student by the teacher saying, I don't recognize this as part of your writing style, so I'm going to assume that you use this new tool. Now, of course, kids are, but I think there's a real risk if teachers are using that as an excuse to punish or in some ways denigrate one of their students. It's very hard to check both pro and con as to whether or not someone used ChatGPT to actually do an assignment.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating, because that's one of the things that we should really do a whole episode on whether or not we should be looking for, whether we should be calling that cheating or not, or whether we should be
exactly
looking for it or seeking it out, or what. And the reality is that so many of the great books, especially that are written today that we love, are written by not the author. And I know that that upsets you as someone who does write his own books, but
not particularly. I've done ghostwriting, you know.
So. Yeah. So, see, it's out. So the most popular book that was open about it is called Who Not How by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. And in that book, Ben Hardy is the one who's actually writing it. And they say it from the very beginning that Dan Sullivan, the whole premise of that book is you should look for who can do something, not how you can accomplish something. And so in that book, he said, my philosophy is I should find the person who can do the work. And the work of writing is Ben's job. And my job, Dan, is to say this is what's going to be in the book. And then Ben is going to write the whole book. And that is exactly what happened. And they actually explain how that worked. And it's nice that, Ben got a co-author credit on that instead of just being a ghostwriter and not.
Right. Tell me about it.
not having his name on there at all. But that's something that is really a distinction that we think that, for students, if they use ChatGPT, then they are quote unquote cheating, when really they're just using another resource at their disposal to help them. If they use spell check on their computer when they were typing it, would we still say that they were cheating? No, we'd say they were working on creating a professional and good final draft. And we wouldn't say there was anything wrong with that at all. And anyway, we can get more into that in a further episode.
We certainly should. And I think, my working title almost immediately for that episode is a calculator for words, because that is what we're dealing with. I came through the school system when calculators were in exactly the same position as ChatGPT. People were freaking out about the fact that I could buy a cigarette case size calculator with red LED lights, which had, I think, 4 functions. I'm not sure if it had all 4, but in any case, it was a very old calculator. And there were real consequences if you brought a calculator into school. But of course, everybody knew the kids were using them at home, right? Yeah. So the question became, and I think that, other subjects have gone through this, how do you change the way you're teaching, and how do you change your student assessments so that the tool is not determinative of the outcome? And I think that's really what we're going to see happening over the next few years, is people really saying, well, they're going into a world now where generative text is a reality. So what do we need to educate for that world as opposed to one in which it doesn't exist?
Yeah. And that's really the question that we need to be asking. And that's the question that you and I are going to continue to be asking as we go through all of this. And there's a lot more to come as we talk about this. And I encourage people to keep listening, share this episode, and reach out to us if you have questions or thoughts about what we should be talking about on here, because this is these are big questions. And I think a lot of people are looking at it in different ways than you and I are.
Right, which is wonderful because it's such a overarching technology that it's going to touch everybody. And so everybody's going to have a perspective on what its role should be. How do we integrate it into what we do? Some people are going to be saying, how do we kill it? Which is a whole different conversation. But I will say to people that there's a wide range of topics in the show notes for this particular episode that we did not get to. But very much like a prompt for ChatGPT, we will use these to seed our conversations in the future. And whether or not we actually get ChatGPT on here to engage in a dialogue, that's a different question. But we could probably figure out actually how to do that.
Yeah, actually, I did do that on episode 357 of Transformative Principal, I believe. I had I use an AI voice for the whole entire episode,
Oh,
and
wow.
I use ChatGPT to generate much of the script, not all of it, but a ton of it. And so
Yeah,
I definitely encourage people to go check that out, because
I will do that actually.
it's
That
kind of
sounds really
cool. Yeah.
well, actually, just as a sneak preview for February, assuming that I get a chance to go back up to ASTI, one of the tentative presentation ideas is to work with an educator up there and have a basically talk off between Bing, for instance, and ChatGPT, or whatever the leading candidates are at that point. So all I can tell you is that 7 months from now, we don't know what's going to be going on. So
Yeah,
we will see.
that is the truth.